What's up everyone, I'm CallumOnToast, and in today's video I'm going to be showcasing a triple drill run team in the Open Great League with Shadow Beedrill, which is now available once again from Bug-type grunts, as well as Sea King and Lycanroc midday form. Now with a slight pacing improvement on drill run, all three of these Pokemon feel a lot better this season, but Shadow Beedrill in particular, it seems like opponents just were having a really tough time keeping track of its energy since it's just so spammy with both X-Scissor and now drill run costing 40 energy. Now whilst this isn't a team that I'd necessarily recommend, realistically, it was only really Corviknight that I faced that was causing real problems for the team. Everything else felt like I had pretty good play into, and a lot of these games were incredibly close. Now, before we get into the question of the day, I want to give a quick couple of shoutouts to Caterpie Queen and Patriot X69 for their donations in my last couple of live streams. As always, the support is very much appreciated. And with that being said, let's get into the question of the day. What is your favorite Pokemon to run with no stab, fast, or charged attacks? If you don't know what stab means, it's same type attack bonus, so Pokemon with moves that share the same typing that Pokemon is. So let me know in the comment section down below, and with that being said, let's get into the battles now. Alright, so go into the first battle, leading Shadow Beedrill into Kanto Ninetales. Of course, not a great matchup for me, however, the opponent kind of forced the throw straight away, because if they overfarm, we can reach a draw run, win CMP, and deal big damage. So I'm able to swap out, catch a Weather Ball where it's resisted, onto my Sea King, and the opponent gonna choose to stay in here, so I'm able to fire for draw run, and grab a shield advantage. Then I'm gonna come in with a Shadow Gallade, which isn't the best matchup for me, however, you can see the pegs are dealing huge damage already. Leaf Blade, of course, gonna hit for super effective, so we're going to shield that up and then fire off another drill run. Drill run going to be shielded by the opponent. We can now swap back into our Shadow Beedrill, and the opponent should be on Leaf Blade in close combat, both of which are going to be resisted. However, these Psycho Cuts are adding up quite a bit, so I'm going to fire off the X-Scissor. X-Scissor gets the knockout, and the opponent loses track of my energy. They had easily enough energy there for a Weather Ball, but drill run gets the KO, and Shadow Beedrill still not done just quite yet, because we reach yet another drill run. Drill run gonna deal big damage there into the Stunfisk. We can come back in with the Sea King. We don't even need the Lycanroc for this battle, as drill run gets the KO up against the Unova Stunfisk, and I'm able to take that game. So, GG's up on there. Into the next battle, we're going to see a Bastiodon in the leads. Of course, not a great matchup for the Beedrill, except we do have access to Beedrill there. We have access to Drill Run. That's what I meant to say. Drill Run, gonna deal big damage, and then I swap out into my Lycanroc. Now, I was quite hesitant to swap out here just because I do feel like the opponent, if they've got Bastiodon in the lead, yeah, they've either got a Mud Slapper, some sort of Charmer where they're going to resist Sucker Punch, or potentially even a Razor Leaf user where it's going to deal big damage into my Lycanroc. But we have, of course, got all even shields. However, unfortunately, the opponent is going to outpace me to a charge move. So at this point, I'm going to shield this as they fire off the Bone Club, and then go for one more Poison Sting and fire off the X-Scissor. X-Scissor coming through. X-Scissor going to grab the shield. The opponent swaps out into an Ember Shadow Charizard, which means they don't have a lot of fast move pressure. They fire off the Air Cutter. Air Cutter not going to get the boost. The opponent going to reach another Air Cutter here on CMP, so choose not to throw the Icy Wind just yet. I'm going to look to overfarm as much as possible. Unfortunately, Draw Run is resisted, so it won't get the KO, so we have to full send the Icy Wind, but Sea King able to live one more smackdown, reaching the last second Draw Run. Draw Run gets the knockout, and Shadow Beedrill also hanging on with 1 HP and a dream, reaching the X-Scissor, taking out the Shadow Kanto Marowak. Honestly, I thought I lost that game like 2 minutes ago, but somehow we're able to pull off the win, so GG's to opponent there. Into the next battle, we're going to see a Bombersnow in the lead. The opponent's going to be safe swapping into Swampert, so I'm going to swap out and look to catch a Hydro Cannon onto my Sea King, where of course it is resisted damage. Now the opponent will be able to reach another charge move here, but I'm not going to bother shielding. I should be able to live a Sludge anyways, but it looks like the opponent is going to be on Earthquake as that second charge move, which means of course we resist the Hydro Cannon damage, and I'm able to reach back-to-back drill runs. First one, unfortunately not dealing quite enough damage to get the knockout. However, it looks like we win CMP here, so draw run number 2 gets the KO. Now at this point, I'm going to try and commit to an Icy Wind, but unfortunately I'm not able to get there in time. Should have just thrown the draw run. Draw run probably wouldn't have been shielded there, but even then it would have done some okayish damage there. But we're able to grab a shield there with the X-Scissor, and now of course I'm going to shield back, and they fire off the Icy Wind. They're going to swap out into Talonflame now. Unfortunately, Lycanroc, despite the fact that we're a Rock-type Pokemon, isn't actually very good into fire-type Pokemon, especially if it's a fire and flying-type Pokemon, because we've got nothing to hit them with. However, I realize I'm not going to reach 2 moves. I need to deal as much fast move pressure as possible, because I need to put them into range where a resisted Drill Run will get the knockout. So we come back in with the Beedrill. The opponent swaps back into a Bomber Snow, and all I need to do is farm up to 1 away from back-to-back charge moves, as X-Scissor gets the KO up against the Bomber Snow. We can now fire off 1 more Poison Sting, safely avoid taking damage from the Incinerate. Drill Run gets the knockout, and I'm able to take that game. So, GG's up on there. Into the next battle, I'm going to see a Kingdra in the lead. So, this is going to be a fairly neutral matchup here. If the opponent farms up to the potential Surf, then I will probably respect it. However, they go straight for a Swift. So, they will outpace me to the first charge move. However, it does only cost 4 Poison Stings to reach the second move. So, I should be able to reach it on CMP. I'm going to go for a Drill Run just in case the opponent tries to catch onto something like a Tinkaton. But either way, Drill Run, going to be no-shielded, and we get the KO. The opponent is going to reveal a Tinkaton. They do get the full farm down, but that's okay. We've got Drill Run coverage on all 3 Pokemon. And Seaking as well is also going to resist the Gigaton Hammer, which means they end up going for a Bulldoze instead. Bulldoze is actually going to do quite a bit less damage than a Gigaton Hammer, despite the fact that Gigaton Hammer is resisted. So at this point, they might end up full sending. I'm going to no-shield either way, as I should be able to live this. And the opponent is now going to swap out and make a very nice catch there, catching onto Seismitoad. Drill Run is going to connect, however, and despite the fact that, of course, they've still got both shields, and they can go for Icy Wind debuffs, I should be able to go for 2 shields and then just fully fast move farm them down. However, I am going to fire off a Drill Run here because I realize, well, I do need to apply some sort of shield pressure, so we're going to grab a shield from the opponent. They're going to fire off the charge move. I should be able to farm down. However, unfortunately, their switch clock is now coming up, and here, unfortunately, I just lost track of their energy. They threw 1 Fairy Wind before swapping out to make the catch there. I completely forgot about that, which means I was 1 out with my counts there, not able to pull off the catch, and so I end up losing that game. But GG's up on there. Into the next battle, I'm going to see Shadow for Alligator in the lead, and this time around, we're able to make the catch there, as the opponent is going to fire off that Hydro Cannon straight away. They're going to come in with a Shadow Venusaur. I'm committing to the Icy Wind, which is going to force the opponent to throw it on CMP. Unfortunately, we lose CMP there, but that's okay, as we can now come back in with our Shadow Beedrill. Beedrill going to completely wall this Pokemon here, so at this point, we're now going to look to overfarm quite considerably. Fire off the X-Scissor just before they do reach a potential charge move. X-Scissor gets the KO. They come back in with the Shadow for Alligator, and we are just super spammy here. So if the opponent ends up shielding, I will reach another X-Scissor on the CMP tie. The opponent does not throw straight away, however, potentially looking to commit to a full farm down, but Shadow Beedrill able to reach another move. Now, unfortunately, they do catch a X-Scissor onto Azumarill, where that is resisted damage, but I've still got 2 shields here. However, am I actually going to be able to use them, or will the opponent just be able to bubble farm me down? We fire off the Trailblaze. At this point, I kind of need to commit to a full fast move farm down, despite the fact that Sucker Punch is resisted. Now, of course, I am boosted. We commit to the farm down, and we are just barely able to get it. We come out with another Trailblaze loaded. Drill Run probably would have got the KO from this range, but we might as well go for Trailblaze. It's super effective, and I'm able to take that game. So, GG's up on there. Into the next battle, I'm going to see a Shadow Celio in the lead. So, I will outpace them before they can reach a potential Surf. So, I'm going to go straight for an X-Scissor here. Not expecting to grab a shield. And then I will swap into my Seaking, hoping to catch a Surf. Obviously, it doesn't work out, but the opponent is still going to throw some energy. They fire off a Body Slam before swapping out into Shadow Drapion, where, of course, we've got access to Drill Run. I'm going to throw this straight away, and Drill Run is going to be shielded. At this point, we can outpace them to another charge move here if I want to use a shield. So, the opponent is going to full stand the crunch, and now I will fire off another Drill Run. So Drill Run number 2 coming through. Drill Run going to grab the final shield there. I'm then going to swap out and catch potentially a Crunch onto my Shadow Beedrill. Crunch is going to get the straight up knockout there. And unfortunately, I'm going to have to come in with my Lycanroc. However, my fast move damage is resisted. They're going to have access to Aqua Tail and Surf on their 2 Pokemon that we've seen already. So I will have to use my final shield. And honestly, I can't really remember how much energy the Shadow Drapion has. So I'm not going to bother over farming. Maybe could have gone for 1 more Sucker Punch. But either way, Drill Run gets the knockout, but they are going to have a Corviknight in the back. Now, it is a Shadow Corviknight, which honestly is probably slightly worse for us because whilst, yes, we are doing slightly more damage, they're actually going to put us into range, but they can just settle for an Air Cutter, and unfortunately, because they do overfarm perfectly, I'm not quite going to reach an Icy Wind before they reach Air Cutter number 2, and as a result, Air Cutter takes us out, and unfortunately, I lose that game. But GG's up on there. Into the next battle, I'm going to see Altaria in the leads. Of course, not a good matchup for me, but I'm going to stay in this matchup initially, swap out, and I'm able to catch a Sky Attack resisted damage onto my Lycanroc. They are going to swap out into a Swampert. Now, we don't have the energy advantage. However, the opponent is going to look to overfarm, so I'm going straight for Trailblaze. Trailblaze, going to be shielded, unfortunately. However, we have put them into range where hopefully an X-Scissor will eventually KO. So we're going to come back in with our Shadow Beedrill. We have the charge move already loaded, and the opponent, they might not throw immediately here. So the opponent goes for the extra Mud Shot instead, which means we can go for X-Scissor. We grab the shield, we swap out, but the opponent swaps at the same time, and that works out perfectly for me as I'm able to reach an Icy Wind. Now, I wasn't entirely sure if that would KO, so I go for a slight undercharge here. Now, of course, I've debuffed their attack stat. I can go for a farm down and come out with some energy. Now, we don't quite have a Drill Run loaded, but the opponent's final Pokemon going to be a Tinkaton, and this should be game over. We go for Drill Run, we swap back into Shadow Beedrill. I'm able to force a CMP tie, or at least I tried to force a CMP tie. Either way, doesn't matter. Drill Run gets the knockout, and the opponent does have quite a lot of energy, but at this point, I can safely shield here. We have the energy for an X-Scissor now, so I will throw straight away. And of course, X-Scissor from this range up against the Swampert gets the knockout, and I'm able to take that game. So, GG's up on there. Into the next battle, I'm going to see a Shadow Gliscor in the leads. Of course, not a great matchup for me. I'm going to be swapping out into my Lycanroc, and unfortunately, whilst yes, I am resisting the wing attack damage, a Sand Tomb is going to hit for super effective, and Lycanroc is a super glassy Pokemon, so I'm kind of forced to shield there. They're now going to come in with their own Sucker Punch user in the form of Furret, and I'm able to force a CMP tie with likely a Brick Break. Brick Break going to get the knockout straight away. That's fine with me. We can now come in with our Shadow Beedrill, and of course, unfortunately, well, okay, we are lagging quite a bit here. Quite difficult to tell if the opponent got any extra fastly through. I think maybe they were also lagging. Not really sure. Either way, X-Scissor unfortunately doesn't quite get the knockout, so I will have to sponge the damage from a Swift. Swift, of course, going to get me fairly low. One more Poison Sting gets the farm down. We swap out into our Sea King, and the opponent's final Pokemon is going to be a Abomasnow. Now, I make a pretty significant error in this battle here. At this point, I thought I still had 2 shields, so I was like, you know what? We've landed the Icy Wind now. I can just commit both shields, go for a full peck farm down, come out with back-to-back charges pretty much loaded. But no, they already got my shields down. Energy Ball gets the KO there. I don't know what I was thinking. Either way, I don't think I would have been able to win that game anyways, just because if I throw a charge move there, my switch clock doesn't quite come up in time, and unfortunately, they do still reach that charge move there. But either way, GG's to that trainer. Into the next battle, we're going to see a Primeape in the lead. So pretty good matchup for me, and they're going to say swap into Tinkaton, which is still pretty good for me. Now, I'm going to swap out looking to catch a Gigaton Hammer onto my Sea King, and I am successful with that catch there. Now, the opponent is not going to bother farming up to another Gigaton Hammer, which means this will just be a Bulldoze, which, as I've mentioned, not going to do anywhere near as much damage, despite the fact that Gigaton Hammer was resisted. So at this point, we're going to fire off the Drill Run. Drill Run should get the KO, and we also have an Icy Wind ready to throw into the Primeape coming back in. So Icy Wind going to debuff their attack stat. It does actually allow me to live one more Karate Chop, which isn't that ideal for me, but either way, we can still no-shield this first move. They're debuffed. Rage Fist doesn't do an awful lot of damage. I'm going to look to overfarm here, and then I fire off a Drill Run. Drill Run, going to get the knockout. Their final Pokemon, going to be Greninja, but Beedrill is super spammy. We already have another X's, and the opponent realizes it's already game over, and so they just let the move go through, and are able to take that game. I think potentially they maybe had a slight chance that they could Water Shuriken farm me down there, but I think it was quite unlikely. Anyways, into next battle, we're going to see Shadow Beedrill into a Shadow Alolan Sandslash. So of course, both benefiting from the Drill Run pacing buff here. Of course, the first one, we are going to cause a CMP tie. However, the next one, I will reach it just before the opponent. So I'll wait there just to make sure the opponent doesn't try to make a catch, and then I fire off Drill Run number 2. Drill Run is going to be shielded. Unfortunately, because our Poison Stings are double resisted, I'm not entirely sure if a Drill Run will quite get the one-shot, so I'm not going to play out the 2-shot scenario. Instead, I'm going to swap into my Sea King, and the opponent's going to come in with a Florges. So we're going to go for an Icy Wind, debuffing their attack stat. However, it's quite likely that the opponent has Trailblaze for coverage, and Trailblaze going to get the KO there. It's super effective damage, but also it ends up boosting up their attack stat. Now, unfortunately, I get one turn bringing lag there, which is, of course, not ideal for me. They fire off the Chilling Water, and now they're going to come in with a Shadow Quagsire. Of course, I'm debuffed here. I'm hoping to force the opponent opponent to throw their energy, not straight away, but maybe not over farming too much, to the point where I should be able to come in with the Lycanroc and snipe them with a Sucker Punch. So the opponent is, I believe, one away from back-to-back. Alcatel gets the KO, but Sucker Punch also doesn't quite get the knockout there. That is obviously not very ideal for us. The opponent, they can just come in with whatever. They go for the Powder Snow farm down, and unfortunately I lose that game. But GG's to opponent into the next battle. We're going to see another Altaria in the lead. So again, we're going to farm up 2-7. We look to swap out and catch a Sky Attack. However, it doesn't work out for us this time around, as the opponent holds onto the energy and they come in with Empoleon. I'm going to fire off the Draw Run. Draw Run is going to be shielded, and here I feel like I should just barely be able to survive and reach another Draw Run. So I'm going to shield, and we are just narrowly able to do so. Looks like we've got 1 HP in a Dream, but Draw Run grabs the final shield, and we've already got energy on our Shadow Beedrill. So I'm going straight for Draw Run. Draw Run is going to get the knockout finally up against the Empoleon. I'm going to swap out into my Sea King, and I'm going to no-shield the first charge move, but they did overfarm massively, so the opponent actually going to be able to reach a second Sky Attack before I even reach the Icy Wind. Now, I am wary of a potential catch. However, the opponent is just going to choose to stay in with the Altaria, so we're going to go for the Icy Wind there. We did overfarm ever so slightly, and their final Pokemon is going to be a Kanto Ninetales. Now, this is quite tricky for me because the opponent, well, they are super spammy, and they can comfortably tank that, but again, they lose track of the energy on our Shadow Beedrill, which means Drill Run gets the knockout, and I'm able to take that game. So, GG's to opponent into the next battle. I'm going to see Shadow Empoleon in the lead this time around, and this time they're actually going to be on Waterfall as the fast move. So at this point, we're going to go for 7 Poison Stings. Of course, that is double resisted, but Draw Run not respected for some reason. We get the one shot. I honestly don't understand that play at all, and now they're going to come in with a Galarian Moltres. So of course, X-Scissor is going to hit for neutral damage. I'm able to connect, and now I'm going to safe swap into my Sea King. The opponent is going to choose to stay in here. I didn't want to throw straight away just in case the opponent tries to make a catch. However, now the opponent does kind of have to swap out there, and they're going to come in with Unova and Stunfisk. Now we are so far ahead on energy to the point where we can grab a shield and we can still reach a Drill Run before the opponent gets off a discharge. Drill Run is going to connect. It does decent damage there. I should now be able to live a discharge, so I'm going to swap out, clear that wasn't debuff, what am I talking about? Just swapping out there, forcing the opponent to use all of their energy up against our Shadow Beedrill, and now hoping to sweep with the Lycanroc. Now, unfortunately, Sucker Punches, they are non-stab damage, so whilst we are very attack-weighted, we're not really dealing that much damage. However, the opponent is going to swap out, and this is kind of what I want. I need to get the KO with the Trailblaze there, because they would resist the Sucker Punch damage, and the opponent, they just made the catch there, but I'm also able to swap out, catch the charge move, which means we can just fully fast move farm them down, and I'm able to take that game. So, GG's opponent into the next battle. I see Galarian Stunfisk this time around in the lead, and we will be able to reach a Draw Run on the CMP tie with a potential Rock Slide. We throw straight away, and we force the CMP tie. Now, the opponent is going to use a shield. I'm happy to match shields here. Once again, we should be able to outpace them to the next move, so I'm going to wait one turn just to make sure they don't make the catch there, and then fire off Draw Run number 2. They're actually going to double shield, so again, I'm going to swap out into my Sea King. I know for sure that a Draw Run won't get the one shot up against the Galarian Stunfisk here, so we're now going to come in, we're going to fire off the Draw Run into the Stunfisk, and this should get them fairly low here, but they do live actually pretty comfortably, and now the opponent is going to reach a Rock Slide. They do throw straight away, so I should be able to win CMP with my Shadow Beedrill. However, it just depends. Are they going to try and make a catch? And yes, they swap out into Shadow Dragonite. I don't have the best response here, so I'm actually just going to chip with the X-Scissor, and I'm also going to force them to throw straight away. This is fine by me because I'm hoping that Lycanroc can sweep in the end game. We're going to come in with the Lycanroc and then go for the full Sucker Punch farm down. The opponent is going to reveal their final Pokemon to be a Drifblim in the back here, and I make a pretty big mistake. I fire off the Drill Run. This is going to get the knockout. However, I didn't really need to do that. Drifblim not going to get to a charge move here, but unfortunately Trailblaze is resisted damage. What I should have done up against the Stunfisk is actually send a Trailblaze, because I boost up my attack stat. Sucker Punches, they're then going to add up more up against the Drifblim, and I would still be able to reach a charge move anyways before they do get to a potential Icy Wind, and by the time I'm boosted, Trailblaze would have got the knockout. But either way, GG's to that trainer into the next battle. We're going to see the opponent is going to make a very nice catch there, catching X-Scissor onto Fearow. However, that kind of helps me because honestly, Lycanroc kind of struggles to take out Fearow, whereas now, because we've chipped with the X-Scissor, I can shield once, commit to the full Sucker Punch farm down, and come out with a decent amount of energy. They're going to come back in with the Quagsire. We go straight for Trailblaze, and Trailblaze, unfortunately, is going to be shielded. However, I'm going to look to shield as well, as the opponent is going to fire for the Aqua Tail, and then eventually I will look to try and swap and make a catch. However, the opponent going to come in with a Tinkaton. This is fine with me. We are boosted. Drillrun does huge damage there. I then swap into my Shadow Beedrill, forcing the opponent to throw some energy. Now, Bulldoze doesn't quite get the KO there, but it doesn't really matter too much. We can come in with our Seeking. Honestly, I probably shouldn't have waited out a Switch Clock as long as I did, because the opponent should now, after throwing a Charge Move, be able to swap back into their Quagsire, and that is slightly problematic for me because I don't get quite as much energy. We go for the Icy Wind first because this should allow me to live an Aqua Tail. However, this is still going to be a pretty tricky situation. We go for the Drill Run here. We are one away from a Charge Move on our Lycanroc, so we're hoping to force them to full send a Stone Edge, which they don't do, which means we can just Peck Farm them down. We can now come in, go for the Sucker Punch farm down up against the Tinkaton, and I'm able to take that game. So, GG's won there into the next battle. You can see Shadow Girafarig in the lead. So this is a bit of a tricky matchup for me. I'm going to be swapping out straight away into my Lycanroc, where Sucker Punches are dealing for huge damage, but likewise Confusion also absolutely chunking. We are going to see a Shadow Kingdra coming in. I'm going straight for Trailblaze here because I want to boost up my attack stat, and now the opponent can just shield that up there and then go for a full fast move farm down. I'm going to come in with the Shadow Beedrill, of course. It doesn't have that much play into Girafarig. I'm going to no shield this. Should just barely live a Surf there. Actually, maybe not, to be honest. That Swift did quite a lot of damage, but either way, I'm firing off the X-Scissor. X-Scissor gets the knockout, and now I'm going to come in with my Seeking. The opponent comes in with a Shadow Kanto Ninetales. Now here, what I should have done is just thrown the Charge Move straight away. I was expecting a potential catch attempt onto Girafarig. However, because I swapped out, I was one turn behind. If I threw straight away, I'd then reach this next Charge Move at the same time as the opponent. Whereas now, unfortunately, I have to tank the Energy Ball. They swap back into Girafarig, and I have one win condition. I need to go for the perfect undercharge, but unfortunately, it wasn't quite enough there, which means we take one huge Confusion's worth of damage. We don't get to a Charge Move with our Beedrill. They Ember Farm me down, and unfortunately, I lose that game. But GG's opponent there into the final battle, I believe, of this video, safe swapping into our Lycanroc after leading into Talonflame, and unfortunately met with Superior. However, we are going to grab a shield advantage, which is very nice. Now, there is the chance that they're on Leaf Tornado, in which case I don't really want to shield here because they would actually outpace me to the next move. However, it looks like they're on Aerial Ace, and Beedrill, of course, going to take super effective damage from the Aerial Ace, so I might as well end up shielding here. Now I'm going to look to overfar massively and throw on CMP. Of course, Beedrill very comfortably going to win CMP. X-Scissor gets the KO. They come back in with a Talonflame, and they are going to bank some energy before swapping out into Azumarill. So this point, I'm going to go for a Drill Run first. A Drill Run really not going to deal that much damage here. However, now I'm going to go for an Icy Wind. Icy Wind isn't going to do that much less damage up against the Azumarill here, but what it will do is allow me to very comfortably tank a Play Rough, and now I can just bank a Drill Run, come back in to my Beedrill, and then fire another Drill Run here. So of course, Drill Run should be getting the knockout, but the opponent gonna bank the energy once again, and then come in with the Talonflame. Now this is quite tricky here because they're gonna go for a Flame Charge, boosting up their attack stat. However, it looks like I might just barely live 2 more Incinerates. We tank the first one, and Shadow Beedrill able to hang on there with 1 HP in a Dream. Drill Run number 2 gets the KO. They come back in with Azumarill. I just stay in there to get off 1 more Poison Sting, and that should now put them into range where Drill Run gets the KO up against the Azumarill, and I'm able to take that game. So that's going to be it for today's video. If you did enjoy it, please make sure you leave a like, leave a comment letting me know, and as well, don't forget to respond to the question of the day if you haven't done so already. And if you want to see more content like this in the future, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on post notifications. That way you'll be notified whenever I upload a new video. Now if you want to take your support to the next level, you can become a channel member with perks including early access to new videos, shoutouts at the end of each video, custom loyalty badges, and custom emojis to use in the comments of every video. I want to say a massive thank you to everyone that has become a channel member already. Your support is greatly appreciated. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching today's video, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.